Should I go? You want to? Okay, go. So, so Mirabai brought up something about the dark night of the soul, and one of our beloved fellow teachers, spiritual teacher is Andrew Harvey. Some of you know, and he's been saying that for a while now, that he feels that we're in a global dark night of the soul, which I find very helpful framing for what's going on in the world. And so we have two experts on global night of the soul. Of dark night of the soul. So what I'd like to ask both of you is, we're in a place that feels unknown. It feels like it's going to be scary. We're going to maybe see things like, remember a few years ago, we saw a man on a horseback whipping immigrants from his horse. We're going to see mass deportations, families being broken up. We're going to see some people that are vulnerable. I'll speak for myself. My son is gay. He's not trans, but he's gender fluid. And I'm scared. I am scared. I was scared when he was 5 and wanted to wear a dress, and I made him be a boy because I was so scared of what was going to happen to him if he went to school that way. And now I'm scared again. I'm really scared that his community, his friends, and so on are going to be subject to violence. They've been the target of a whole campaign, an anti-trans campaign. And he told me that the hotline for the LGBTQ world is on fire. So the suicide hotline and so on. So we're going into something that is unknowing. I think sometimes about Christ, unless the seed drops into the ground, it won't come to fruition. So Mirabai, can you frame for us what happens in the dark night of the soul, and where is God in that?
I've been thinking a lot about this global dark night too, trying to map on this teaching that resonates so much with me individually, as I know it does with you, Jim. The personal dark nights when we're stripped, as I said, of all of our sensory attachments to the divine, and all of our conceptual constructs just collapse. That I can get behind. We've all had those, right? And people say to me, can you have more than one? And the answer is, yep. And we do, and you probably have. So how does this beautiful map of the spiritual journey of maturing, becoming a spiritually mature person, how does that play out now in the global family? Because it's just like, if there's no such thing as individual salvation or enlightenment, if that's a construct that has to go now, and I believe it does, then that also means that these experiences of being plunged into radical unknowing are shared communal experiences, and our responses have to be collective. And so the dark night invites us to be both active and passive, to do our work, to show up with consciousness and with our hearts open. And it also involves surrender to not knowing. So the environmental movement, for instance, is predicated on the notion that the environment is broken and the smart people need to figure it the fuck out fast. But a new sort of underground movement in the environmental awareness is that we actually have to stop thinking in terms of broken gizmos that need to be repaired. but rather allow the solutions to come from the darkness. Those seeds that drop into the darkness that can only ripen in the darkness require patience and trust and listening, leaning into each other's voices. And that's why finally the environmental movement is looking to indigenous wisdom. It's like, oh yeah, you guys know exactly what's up. That we need to, it's not all happening at the chalkboard and the computer. It's been, this wisdom is available mostly on the margins. And so what's now margins, but what used to be the main source of wisdom, which was indigenous. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm listening to the voices on the margins of society to show me and us how to be a family of humans, each of whom have their own gifts to bring to the table, and some of which don't look at all like solutions. They look like art and poetry and music and relationship. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but yeah, I think we have to listen to each other, listen to the quieter voices, especially right now.
But is it that when someone individual goes through the dark night, is there something that like only happens with God when you're in that place where nothing works?
Well, the term dark night can be used in different ways. One of the ways we're using it now, but the way St. John of the Cross used it is that when he was ordained as a Carmelite priest, Teresa of Avila came to him, and she said she wanted to reform the Carmelite order, to return to the primitive observance of poverty, prayer, and simplicity. And he was thinking of going to the Carthusians, becoming a hermit. And so he agreed to help reform the priests. And so they were discalced Carmelite, meaning barefoot, sandal-wearing Carmelites. And so the priests that taught him scripture in the seminary did not appreciate the implications that they needed reform, see? And so the calxed Carmelites told him to drop it. And he said, I can't. So they get this. They captured him and put him in a little prison in the monastery. Every monastery has one of these. It was cold in the winter. He was in there for 9 months, symbolically 9 months. Cold in the winter, hot in the summer. They wouldn't give him anything to write on, and they would bring him out and strip him to the waist and whip him. And these were the priests that were teaching him scripture and theology in the church. And what he did is he lost refuge in the church. He put his faith in the people that represented God rather than God. See? And when he lost all refuge, that was the dark night. See, but oh, night lovelier than the dawn. See, because there came shining out of that night a light that came flowing out as poetry. See, it came pouring out as poetry, and so the dark night is really the experience of realizing that you've been placing your confidence in systems and people and answers and outcomes, rather than the sovereignty of God's love for you sustaining you in the midst of the situation in which you find yourself this way. So when he escaped from the prison and the nuns read the poetry, they said, what's it mean? So he would take one stanza and write 30-page commentary on that stanza, another 30-page, and you have the mysticism of John of the Cross. But really, that's what it's really all about. It's the dark night. He put it another way, is that God sees you become overly dependent on the finite ways of experiencing God's presence. So what God does is make a move on you and take away the ability to be consoled by finite means. So you go to your place of prayer and God doesn't show up for the prayer, see? And so there's no consolation. And the dark night of faith, back in the good old days when you were holy, it was so clear. See? But now you don't quite even know what it means to believe in God anymore. He said, imagine someone born blind that would be told about the color yellow. They would know through faith that the color yellow exists, but being blind, they wouldn't know what it is. So we say God is eternal, God is love. We don't know what it means. We have ideas of what it means. And so the dark night is a purification process of being delivered from finite means, to see shining through the poverty of our brokenness, the sovereignty of God sustaining us in our brokenness, which he ends up being married to God. See, some people are friends with God. Other people are dating with God, but they want to see other people. See, other people, okay. But what happens if you're married to God? See, because God's married to you. See, because God's in love with you. John of the Cross. That's my sense.
Beautiful. Perfect. Beautiful.
Well, and it just one more thing about that is that poetry is what saved his sanity.
It is. And also look at Rumi with Shems. When they thought they killed Shems, he spun around a pillar, and all this poetry started pouring out this way. And it's the same thing as the dark night of utter loss, and a bright light shines out of the loss and touches the world, really.